This video was brought to you by Squarespace. All of that. Hindsight is 2020. Naturally, I find it endlessly fascinating to observe how bad we are at predicting the future. Like, we as a species, well, I'm not a part of your species. You know what I mean? We as a society are so bad at predicting what's going to happen. Even though when we get to the future, when the future is now, we look at all of the variables and it's all so obvious. It's so obvious. Going into the Switch 2 generation, we knew that Nintendo was facing some challenges. We knew that the Switch 2 was not going to be as much of an easy win for them. I figured in the long run, the Switch 2 would probably end up being still a pretty darn great success. It just wouldn't sell quite as much as the original Switch. It just made sense. There's going to be some diminishing returns there. You can't endlessly recreate the same hype for your products. And the Switch was such a huge phenomenon. I knew it was really not likely that they would be able to carry all of that over into a new generation. Switch 2, it's a very safe iteration on the concept. It's the same thing, but again, and better. It's naturally gonna see some lower numbers. And we knew that with the economy doing what the economy's been doing, maybe the overall demand for these luxury electronic items would go down a little bit. Nintendo just not gonna be able to price their systems or their games as competitively as they once did. But now, at the beginning of 2026, looking back at the Switch 2's first months on the market, it seems that a lot of what we perceived as potential challenges, maybe we should have noticed as red flags. That's a big problem with trying to predict the future. You look at these potential challenges and you don't know which of them will end up being big challenges or big problems. And when they do end up being big problems, it's like, oh, I mean, we knew it'd be a problem. It's like we knew, but we didn't know, you know? Before launch, Nintendo's stocks were at an all-time high. Everybody was waiting for the Switch 2. Consumers and investors and analysts. Everybody was expecting something huge. And you know what? They did get something huge at launch. It was the biggest launch of a console ever. It could be argued that the launch was so strong almost entirely because Nintendo just provided enough of the darn things. If there weren't chip shortages around the launch of the PS5, if Sony had been able to put as many of those on shelves as they wanted to in that first year, then that probably would have been the biggest console launch of all time. But there's still no doubt about it. Selling 10 million Switch 2s in the span of a couple of months, like that's still pretty darn good. Breaking any kind of record at all is obviously a very big win. And yet after that point, Switch 2 sales slowed down pretty darn dramatically. I won't go into the entire thing now. I've done plenty of videos on this on Topic Arlo, but basically, Nintendo had a really poor holiday season. And I do want to be fair, the holiday season was pretty much bad across the board for the entire video game industry. That darn AI bubble and the sudden need to build all of these data centers has driven RAM prices way up, and things are only going to get worse throughout this year. Hardware is getting more and more expensive to produce. All of these companies are raising the prices of their systems over and over again. Our wallets are already hurting. Our money is worth less and less. Everything is more and more expensive, so we're gonna have to be more and more careful with these kinds of luxury purchases. And all of this is kind of added together into a holiday season that underperformed pretty much across the board. And I just find it so funny that all of the variables, all of the factors have been in place for a long time. We know about the whole AI bubble. You could probably predict that all of these new data centers would lead to an increase in all of these hardware prices, and that would have a big effect on the bottom line of these luxury electronic goods, and that would lead to higher prices, and that may lead to more and more people just simply not making purchases of things like the Switch 2. And yet, I didn't see very many analysts predicting that something like this would happen. Admittedly, I did not go and dig into every report from every analyst, from every firm everywhere, but for the most part, whenever I saw talk of an analyst talking about Nintendo's chances with the Switch 2, they were all pretty darn optimistic. They were just like, well, the Switch sold well, so the Switch 2 will probably also sell well. Oh, sure, Nintendo is certainly facing some challenges. Just like I said, we all saw it. We all saw that they were facing some challenges, but they're just challenges. They'll still be okay. And yet now, just looking at the situation, looking at the sales numbers and how they have kind of, I don't want to say bottomed out. We still don't have all of the official data from the last quarter. Nintendo is probably going to be putting those numbers out in like early February or something. And I'm not here to tell you, I'm not here to claim that the Switch 2 is doomed, that the thing is going to sell terribly, it's going to be a big flop, yada, yada, yada. I do not think that that is true. However, I do think that this thing is going to have a much more difficult year one and maybe even year two than Nintendo or we could have ever anticipated. Again, despite the fact that now it feels kind of obvious, just putting together all those variables, putting the whole entire picture together, it just kind of seemed like this was inevitable. Now, okay, now here's another reason to give ourselves a little bit of credit. I think it is genuinely difficult for just about every person on this planet to really, truly grasp the idea and accept the idea that things just keep getting worse. It feels so unfair and it feels so wrong that things would just keep getting worse and worse. And of course, that the leadership would just keep making things worse and worse and worse and worse. We think like it's gotta ease up sometime, right? And yet it just keeps happening. And yet it's like hard for us to predict that. It's hard for us to see it coming. It's hard for us to look at next year and be like, okay, well, you know, prices have been going up. Inflation is out of control. It's just gonna be worse. And that is going to affect everything. Like, I don't want to be a huge downer. I try to foster an overall, like, kind of positive, optimistic vibe on this channel, but just like, economically speaking, stuff stinks right now, and it does just kind of seem to be getting worse. And I think even analysts, even people whose job it is to look at the entire market and all of these variables and predict what's going to happen, I think it's even hard for them to really look at it closely and put it all together. And you know what? This subject really is fascinating. I think one of the things that we have the hardest time with is like looking at the list of potential challenges and kind of calculating, or at least trying to imagine, how they may all add together. It's one thing to say Nintendo faces this challenge, and there's this here, and there's this thing to consider, and it's another thing to imagine how all of those things may melt together in the pot and how the ultimate product may turn out. Because we have to remember, we're dealing with products here. We are dealing with products that people need to be convinced to purchase. And I know that sounds obvious, but like, it really is a thing. You know, a lot of this just comes down to like psychology, really, you know, like how many people are going to be swayed to purchase this thing. And when you add all of these variables together, they can really heavily impact the average person, the overall consensus of whether or not this thing is worth buying yet. The Switch 2 is a kind of boring, kind of safe iteration on the Switch. Okay, yeah, that's a potential challenge, but like, it's still gonna be a great system and it's still gonna have great games. And I would say at least most of the people who bought the original Switch are gonna wanna make the jump to Switch 2 if they wanna keep playing these great Nintendo games. Yeah, the economy be crazy right now, prices are going up and all that, but like, sure, but like, entertainment has historically done well, even in times of great economic downturns. Over the course of history, people always need their comforts. Even when money's tight, people still buy their luxury items, so like, yeah, I'm sure it'll be fine. The powers that be do not have our best interests in mind, which is a difficult reality to grapple with. But that's kind of more or less always been the case in a sense. So I don't know, it'll be fine. But then look at that. We somehow couldn't have predicted how poorly the powers that be would handle things and how much of a humongous mess they would cause. We knew things would get economically tough, but we couldn't have predicted exactly how protective of money people would be forced to become. And there is one very big, very nasty reality that I've kind of been coming to terms with. It started to come up in like the second half of last year. And now going into this year with all the price increases and everything, it's becoming more and more obvious. And I kind of made the mistake of not applying what I was realizing, to Nintendo themselves. I'm gonna do a whole separate video on this because I do think this is a very big deal. But the long and short of it is, I think the entire game industry is in a bit of a sticky wicket this year. They're in a bit of a pickle. And if you want to boil it all down, it really just comes down to the fact that it is getting easier and easier and easier to just not purchase new video games. Before we continue, a quick reminder that this video was, in fact, brought to you by Squarespace. Whatever kind of website you need, blog, content library, info page, storefront, something weird I haven't even considered, Squarespace can make building it as easy as pie. The intuitive builder means you can format text, embed images and videos and whatnot, tweak visual elements and features, all without any experience and without writing so much as a single line of code. You can even jumpstart your site with a template and work from there. My site, Arlo Recommends, is a simple blog, and creating content is just as easy. I paste in my text, add pictures and links, schedule everything to automatically publish, and even generate social media posts at a later date, and I'm done. Then I can check in with the built-in analytics to see how my site is doing, and of course, I can always tap into Squarespace's powerful extensions if I ever need more. To try out Squarespace for yourself, head to squarespace.com for a free trial. Then when you're ready to launch, head to squarespace.com/Arlo to save 10% off your first website or domain. And now for today's recommendation: Love Letters by Rena Jones. This album is one of the most beautiful pieces of music I've heard in years, and some of its songs have fewer than 100 listens on YouTube Music. Just tragically underappreciated. And if you've struggled with ADHD, look into the album's meaning for a whole extra level of emotional intensity. Thanks again to Squarespace. Now please enjoy the rest of the video if you don't mind. The game industry has just been growing and growing and growing since it first began, and there have been natural ups and downs, booms and busts. 2020, the pandemic, obviously that led to a humongous boom, and then we're kind of like seeing some of that bubble sort of pop a little bit. Overall though, the trajectory has been up and up and up and up and up. It's a crazy profitable industry, and yet now we're finally seeing that growth stall. And we're getting reports that more and more and more people, they're just sticking to older games. Because that's the thing about all of these years, especially when everything went digital, especially with like digital storefronts and Steam and indie games and everything. There's just too many games to play. There's this, like, backlogs just get longer and longer and longer, and we all kind of laugh about it, but like it really is getting to the point where like, okay, you could probably just buy like $5 indie games for the rest of your life. Like you know what I mean? Like you could spend like $1,000 right now and buy every game you could ever need to play forever. There's just like lifetimes of content now easily available on sale every single day. And when you combine this with economical factors, it's just getting harder and harder to just live and thrive in this world. More and more people are looking at these crazy expensive systems and games and just being like, nah, I'll just not. And again, I did not think to properly apply that line of thinking to Nintendo. I do think I was blinded a little bit by the crazy success of the Switch, just like kind of everyone was, just like even the analysts were. Okay, but let's continue to be fair. Let's continue to give ourselves at least a little bit of credit. There are things that we could not have predicted. The Switch's first year on the market saw the launch of so many of these system-selling tentpole games. The biggest Zelda ever, the biggest Mario ever, a new Splatoon game. So many great games, you couldn't not buy one. It sold us on the idea of itself so immediately. And I think maybe we couldn't really have predicted that Nintendo would kind of fail to replicate that success. And I mean, like, I don't think anyone expected anything quite as huge as that. Like, you know, we knew we weren't going to be getting a new 3D Zelda at launch or anything like that. But I think we did anticipate that Nintendo would be giving us at least 1 or 2 games that really sold us on the Switch 2, made it just this must-have system. And it really didn't happen, and I still don't get it. Like, I'm still struggling with this. I do have to give myself credit. They had Mario Kart on day one. It's Mario Kart. That is the system seller. And I don't know, maybe it's even worth going into a whole separate video about like the psychology behind this. Like, why isn't Mario Kart World selling more systems? Is it just that Mario Kart 8 Deluxe was so good and it had so much content, so many tracks that like people are just like fine waiting? Is it just that the open world is like the biggest selling point and it's really not that great of a selling point because it's kind of empty or something? Like, I don't know, but for whatever reason, like Mario Kart World should have been that game, one of those games, but it just wasn't. And beyond that, we just haven't had any one must-have game, and I really don't think we could have anticipated that would happen, even though we knew it was possible. We absolutely knew that it was possible. And now we're in this situation where you put all of this together. Nintendo just not really providing the games in the way that we feel like they should and kind of expected them to. The economy, the money, this and that, the safe iteration, blah, 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 blah. All of that put together has led to a Nintendo playing populace that is just largely unconvinced, even though most of these factors have been clear and obvious for a good while. We just didn't put it together. We just could not imagine that the Switch 2 would struggle this much. The enthusiasts who were gonna buy the system pretty much no matter what ran out and bought a system, and now store shelves are still full of Switch 2s. And they're just not really selling much beyond that. Again, it's a psychological thing. It's binary. Are people gonna buy it? Are they convinced? Yes or no? And all of these factors have added together to lead to a very large percentage of the potential audience picking no. And again, I do not think that this spells doom for the console. I think that once the games really start coming out, once we do get some of those must-have titles, I really do think the Switch 2's fortunes could turn around. I think we could still see very, very good numbers by the end of the generation. But I think the Switch 2 is probably going to struggle this year. I really do. And so much of it does come down to the games. Nintendo has not yet announced any of those games for 2026 or beyond. There are currently 0 announced titles for the Switch 2 that are gonna move the kinds of units that Nintendo needs to move. And because those kinds of humongous AAA tentpole games, because they tend to need a good amount of time between reveal and release, I don't think there's basically any chance that we're gonna get anything like that within the first half of 2026 and maybe even a bit beyond that. If Nintendo announces something huge in February, then okay, yeah, maybe we could see it like June, July or something. There are technically no rules about how long they have to wait between reveal and release, but yeah, for really big games, it's generally a good bit. So right now, beyond like the hypotheticals, the games that we do know are gonna come eventually, there isn't any real reason to get a Switch 2 right now beyond the reasons and the games that we already have. And if those haven't convinced people, then there you go. Now, I already talked about this in my predictions video, but Pokemon Gen 10 is coming this year, and I do think that right there, that is absolutely one of those games, completely, that is going to move units. I don't know if it'll be enough to like really get the momentum going again, but at the very, very least, we are going to see a very big surge in sales. But what else has Nintendo got? Like, is that going to be it? Or does Nintendo have some other really humongous system-selling game that they're going to release in the second half? We really don't know, and I want to assume that they will. I want to assume they'll give us something else, but like, they didn't even give us a holiday game in 2025. Like, that's not something I ever could have anticipated, that in the first year, the first holiday of the Switch 2's life, they would just not give us some big holiday game. Again, looking back to the Switch, Breath of the Wild on day one, and then Mario Odyssey for Christmas, that was crazy. And this time we had Mario Kart World for launch, and then nothing for Christmas. Just kinda nothing beyond, like, cross-gen stuff. So I want to assume Nintendo will give us something else, but, like, I don't know, maybe they won't. Maybe they won't, and we really are just waiting for Pokemon. And if that's the case, it's gonna be a rough year. There are not going to be any new factors that convince people, that push people over the edge, that convince them to buy a Switch 2. It's not gonna happen until we get some games. I mean, here, like, let's do it. Let's put together all these variables to try to accurately predict the future. I think that if we know we're not going to be getting any huge games, at least for a good long while, Nintendo is not going to be lowering the price of the Switch 2 anytime soon. If anything, they're going to raise the price if we know that the economy is just going to get worse and worse and worse, and AI is going to drive all the prices up. Put all that together, and I see struggle. I see the Switch 2 struggling really, really hard to sell for most of 2026. You know, like, if they couldn't sell that many units during the holidays, you know, when we actually have, like, extra incentive to buy these things, you know, Christmas presents, especially, like, for kids and loved ones, like, if that wasn't enough to drive sales in any really significant way, then what's gonna happen between now and, like, Pokemon, you know? And if you want to talk even more about the multiplicative effect of all these factors, the Switch 2's relatively poor performance over the holidays, combined with the fact that, again, Nintendo just hasn't really announced any other huge games, that's got Nintendo's investors a little bit freaked out. And if their stocks were at an all-time high before the Switch 2 launched, now they have dropped pretty darn significantly. Over the last 5 months, their stock value has dropped by like 33%. Like, I know it was probably artificially inflated because of the Switch 2 hype, but still, like, that's pretty big. And when stock prices start to fall and investors start to get scared and they pull out, that makes the other investors scared and they start to pull out. So that's why we see these kind of wild up and down swings. And as with sales, I don't know how this is going to change anytime soon without any other variables entering the equation, without any big announcements. Like, what is going to revitalize interest and confidence in Nintendo? What is going to convince investors to stick with them and ride out this dip? I really don't know. Between the investors and the customers, Nintendo has a whole lot of convincing to do. There's all this pressure to both recreate the financial success of the Switch and then just provide us with cool games. And just, that spotlight, that bright beam is right on them. And all of us, just like the whole world collectively, we're just... Okay. Clock's ticking, Nintendo. Where is it? Where's the games? Where's the money? And I really do think in a couple years, things could be different, you know, again, like we'll get Pokemon and we'll get like Smash or something, and eventually we get like a 3D Mario, and things will definitely, they'll turn around. I really do think overall the Switch 2 is probably gonna do at least okay, you know? I just think Nintendo is gonna have to work for that success a lot harder than they may have initially anticipated. Which, hey, I mean, that's a good thing, right? You know, like what happens with pretty much all video game companies. They get this big, easy win, their head gets a little bit too big for their shoulders, so like, no, big fat slice of humble pie is probably exactly what Nintendo needs right now. Whatever the case, though, there's no bad about it. It is going to be an interesting year for Nintendo and the Switch 2. Well, thank you for watching, and if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna go invest in Nintendo while the prices are low. You know, with all that investment money I have.